Welcome to the Liberating Beauty Podcast. I'm Rebecca, your host, and together we'll explore the spirit of beauty, how beauty invites new possibilities, enlivens us to inhabit our innate creativity, and connects us more deeply with ourselves and with each other. We'll have conversations and share reflections that invite you into a frequency of gentleness, truth, and mystery. I'm so glad you're here. If you find the Liberating Beauty Podcast meaningful, please consider supporting our work. To donate, follow the link in the show notes to the Together in Beauty website, home to this podcast, along with other offerings to accompany you on your journey of spiritual becoming. Please subscribe, rate, and share this podcast wherever you listen. And as always, thank you for your support and for being here with us. Welcome back to the Liberating Beauty Podcast. I'm so happy to have you here with me today, and I'm really excited to begin our first ever mini-series that's dedicated to one of my very favorite human experiences, which is creativity. If you haven't already, I'd invite you to go back just a couple of episodes. The last two before this were one called This Too Is Love, and then the next one is called The Feeling of Creativity, where I set the scene for creativity as one of beauty's kindred expressions. So when I thought about who I wanted to invite to this conversation, today's guest was truly the very first person that came to mind. So in addition to being one of my dearest friends, Gail Jacob is a truly beloved pioneer in the field of developmental disabilities. She's a social worker, an advocate for justice, a convener, and an artist. And really what struck me most when I first met Gail was how she lives into her beliefs and her values with such stunning creativity and beauty. And it's like, she's dealing with some of the most serious and deepest systemic challenges of our time. And yet there was this immediate, and I'd say like an unspeakable spark when we connected. And I thought to myself, yep, there's something that feels really familiar here. So it really is a joy and a pleasure to be able to introduce Gail to all of you today on this episode. So Gail, welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. I'm excited to be here, and thank you for that lovely introduction.
Oh, it's all true. It probably doesn't do you justice, but people will have a chance to really see the full you, I think, through today. And in a sense, Gail, actually, that's really where I wanted to start. I mean, I've had the gift of getting to know you for almost a decade now. I was thinking back to how long we've known each other. But for listeners who are just meeting you for the first time, I'd love for you to tell part of your story, even going back and thinking about your earliest days and where you were born and where you were raised, whatever you feel moved to share with us.
Okay. Well, I was born in a displaced persons camp in Feldafing, Germany. My parents were both Holocaust survivors, and I was born after the war, before they immigrated to the United States. They met in a refugee camp and married there, and I was born. And when I was 2 years old, the Jewish agency placed them in a small community in Wisconsin, Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and that's where I grew up. And I lived there until I went off to college in Madison, Wisconsin.
Yeah. Gail, if you can, I'd be so curious. I mean, your very, very beginnings are so striking. What was it like for you growing up in your parents' home from those very early days? What was there, even the surrounding, what did it look like and feel like to you growing up?
Well, I would say that it was difficult being a child of my parents because they were, of course, not only immigrants, but recovering from the trauma of being in concentration camps and labor camps and losing, both of them, losing most of their family. My mother had no surviving family, and my father had some distant family that he, found years later. But they
Mm,
really came to the States alone
mm,
and with no English. So a lot of my growing up memories had to do with translating for my parents, and there was a small survivor community in Sheboygan, and that was their friendship group. But there was
mm,
a lot of disturbing conversation about people's experience in the camps in Germany.
yeah,
And so that was very much my childhood. It was memories of those conversations and, the effort of translating for my parents, making phone calls for them that they
mm,
couldn't navigate on their own.
yeah,
So my first language was not English either. It was Yiddish, and that was what was spoken in our home. So,
mm,
it was challenging, and they were very, I think my parents were very distracted by
mm,
just trying to create a life for our family and work, and just kind of they just seemed overwhelmed a lot of the time.
yeah. How you said it's kind of the energy it took just to kind of create a life took about all the energy that they had. How, if at all, was that mirrored even in the aesthetic of the home that you lived in?
I mean, when I was 5, they bought their own home, so we lived in a rental place until then. So in those days, you could, if you were working at all, you could afford to buy a home, and they did purchase a home when I was 5, and that's where they lived till they died, in that same
Mm,
house. And it was in a kind of on the poor side of town, and I think our whole space was dedicated to just functional
mm,
things. I don't think my parents had really much of an aesthetic at all.
yeah,
And the house was just had functional items in it, some new, some things that were given to them. So I feel like we were pretty constantly in survival mode. I felt that way when I started school,
mm,
and just the challenge the challenges of navigating our environment took up most of everyone's energy. And my brother was born when I just shortly after we came to the States, so they also had a second baby
right.
when I was 3.
Mm,
So
mm,
I don't have a lot of memories of anything in terms of beauty other than, we lived on Lake Michigan or near Lake Michigan. And
yeah,
so, the lake, and there were some lovely places that we would go to, but we didn't have a car. Neither of my parents drove. So when we went anywhere, we either had to walk or get rides from other people. So I think wasn't really deprivation in terms of we were well fed and taken care of, but on every other level, it
yeah,
felt like a lot of deprivation and a lot of, I would say that my parents weren't hugely emotionally available
yeah.
when I was growing up.
Gil, it's such a striking image that you've painted. And in part of the reason I'm asking you is because I think about one of my very first memories of you. I won't remember for what reason we were convening or exactly what we were doing, but it was some kind of community event. And I remember that there were these kind of worn out folding tables where I don't know, we were putting information or whatever. And you brought with you these, like, really beautiful fabrics to drape the tables and brought flowers and added colors, and really changed the chemistry of the entire experience by virtue of doing that, and I wondered, like, where is that instinct coming from? And it made it all the more striking when I later learned about your upbringing, given that it wasn't kind of precisely was not something that was taught or demonstrated. Do you have, like, the earliest sense of where that came from?
Well, it partly came from having a couple friends who were very creative.
Yeah.
So in the my early adulthood, I had a friend, Michael, who collected and sold 20th century modern antiques. And he was very aesthetically oriented and very
Yeah.
sophisticated about his taste. And then I had another friend who was more into a countryish style, but I was just aware of the people I knew who were creative and were able to impact their environment. And, I would say in my early 20s to mid 20s, I started getting interested in what's my taste or what's my style. Even though I had these friends and my friend who brought furniture over that he thought would work in my house, things like that. It took me a while to really distinguish what I liked compared to other people. So I
Oh,
felt like I borrowed other people's taste for a while. But what I discovered is that I really liked having sort of aesthetically pleasing things in my environment, that it
yeah.
brought me joy.
Mm.
And that grew as I got older, and I felt more confident in my own sort of sense of what I liked and didn't like in my environment, I would say.
Gail, as you were talking about borrowing pieces of other people's style and aesthetic and then kind of coming to realize it just didn't really match with who you were becoming. Yeah, what came to me, and I'm curious whether or not this resonates, that in coming into contact with what felt creatively and aesthetically pleasing, it almost felt like it was waking up parts of your identity, almost sort of latent parts of your identity that were expressing through
Hmm.
creativity, making visible parts that you couldn't see before. I'm sure in other ways too, but I'm curious for you to speak on that, if that feels true.
Yeah, definitely. I would say exposure was a big part of it.
Hmm.
The more I got exposed, I don't know how old I was when I met my friend Beth, who lives in New York.
Mm.
But she was also, had her house is like a museum. And, she collects a lot of folk art and artifacts that, when I started working with her and visiting her, it sort of woke up another part of me in terms of color. And also just the places in New York you could go to see art, to buy things that were inexpensive, like fabrics or textiles. I would start just putting beautiful fabrics on my wall. And so I would say that once I got exposed more, I started really developing my own sense of what's beautiful, what's
Yeah.
appealing,
Mm.
and incorporating it into my home.
Mm. I just got this image from your home. One of my absolute favorite parts of your home, which it's interesting in hearing you talk about Beth's home, is probably how I would describe your home. I don't know if I'd say a museum, but like a really rich art gallery in the most grounded sense, kind of art of the people. It's not pretentious, but man, does it have it has such an impact walking into your home. But my absolute favorite part of your home is your fabric collection, and as you were talking about putting fabrics on the wall and kind of sensing into what speaks to you, it almost made me feel like the fabric almost as friends, kind of showing you and introducing you to different possibilities. I'm not necessarily suggesting that you have an animated relationship with them, but that they were speaking to you and bringing something alive into the surface that gave you a chance to have agency and actually see the possibilities in a way that perhaps you hadn't before.
Right. The thing about textiles that just kind of blew me away was just how affordable they were,
Yeah.
that you could go into a shop in Harlem or, some other neighborhood in New York in particular and buy a textile that's been embroidered, that's been worked in beautiful ways. And they were affordable and they
Mm,
looked beautiful when you put them on the wall, and so it felt very accessible. There
mm,
was a period
yeah.
where I didn't create anything myself, but I collected things and had them all over my house.
Oh, I absolutely love that. And it's amazing as you've obviously really developed and deepened your identity, but also your artistry. I I think about your kitchen table, which still has the draping of the fabric and how inviting that feels. And I wouldn't have even have known to make that connection, but something felt important, so intentional about the fabric being there on the table. Yeah.
Right, the
Mm, the
tablecloths, yeah.
tablecloths.
Yeah. Well, again, I just have this thing in my own house where when I was in my parents' house, there was never anywhere for my eyes to rest, that
Mm,
felt pleasing.
yeah.
There just was nothing. I don't know if I can describe that
Mm,
well, but, everything was functional and nothing was beautiful.
yeah.
And what I love in my house is that I can just focus on any corner of my
Mm,
house and
yeah.
find a spot where my eyes can rest, and it gives me just a very uplifting feeling.
Hmm.
So whether it's my dining room table or just a corner of my study or whatever, I just love that I never get tired of seeing whatever's been arranged in that space. So it's not like I'm feel like I'm decorating so much as it feels like I find something that feels right and I put it in a spot and I just love it.
Hmm.
So it's a visual thing, but it really is uplifting to me.
That really speaks to me. I have a hard time sometimes visually, but even almost energetically or spiritually locating myself in a space when there's not a lot in it. So
Mm.
I remember I went with my son Nico to the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. last year. And it's beautiful. It's so intentional the way it's been laid out. And I think intentionally so, they have some rooms that just have one picture, so it really, gives all of your attention to that one thing. I was so dizzy in those spaces because there was no
Hmm.
place for me to anchor, and
Right.
locate myself, so it really resonates with what you're talking about.
Yeah.
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 Mm.
I mean, I don't think about it that much, but just the idea of talking to you about this issue,
Yeah.
aesthetics and beauty, just made me think a lot about how it all evolved. It's just part of me now,
Yeah.
but yeah, I it means a lot to me to have my space feel embracing in that way.
Ooh, I love that. Isn't it incredible some of these impulses that we have and we don't even realize why we've constructed it. And maybe there's a really kind of convenient surface level explanation because it feels good or we're drawn to it, but actually it's serving some deeper yearning or purpose or need, the feeling of being embraced or being able to locate yourself or rest in it. That to me feels so mysterious and benevolent that we would at some level know instinctively how to design our spaces exactly in service of those needs. Like I'm just in awe of that.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
And I don't know that everyone is as sensitive to their physical space.
Yeah.
But apparently I am, because it's just the way it evolved. I realized it has meaning. And at that point, I wasn't really creating anything other than designing my space.
Not that these things are necessarily sequential, but it makes a lot of sense to me that, in a way, the kind of sensing into and the attunement with what actually is reflected of something that feels true and not borrowed.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think about, you've shared with me about when your daughter Sophie was born, and you really did. There's something really natural about having young children that invite that creativity to start taking form just through play. I'd love if you'd like to share more about how that transitioned over from the sensing the fabrics into something tangible.
Well, I think the first time I really engaged in real play was with my daughter as she was growing up. That as a child, I think I was too serious and too anxious to really play in a really authentic way.
Yeah.
I had friends and I hung out with my friends and we did things together, but I just was never felt free.
Yeah.
In that sense. I think I was very weighted down by what was going on in my family. And when Sophie was born, I mean, it was just such a dramatic change where, you become whatever they need you to be. And that sense of play, I mean, it comes when they're babies, right? When they react to you, or you play little games with them, or, I mean, they're so attentive to whatever you do. But there was a point when Sophie was a toddler when I started getting craft supplies. And I started making these posters for us for like Valentine's Day or Halloween, or, I would make a big poster that was sort of a collage. And we'd put it up on the door for those holidays or events. And that was my first time just creating anything that I could think of in terms of that I generated.
Yeah.
And, it became something that Sophie and I did together.
Yeah.
And it was fun. I just enjoyed it. I mean, it didn't feel like serious art, but it was so enjoyable. And I thought, I can do this.
Right.
I can make something,
Right.
even if it appealed to a 3-year-old. And then I think when she was 3 is when I have a friend who's a quilter who said, why aren't you, and she just saw the textiles in the house and said, why aren't you making your own quilts? You seem to love textiles so much. And she said, you should take a quilting class. And I thought, I can't do anything. I'm just not artistic. I was very skeptical, but I went ahead and took a quilting class, a beginning quilting class, and it changed my life. After that, it was like all I wanted to do. And the idea that I could buy textiles and make something out of them. I mean, at the beginning, I just followed patterns, but I had my own sense of color that started evolving at that point, I would say. And I think color is my strength when I think about quilting or working with textiles.
Gail, will you tell the story of the quilting class you took where everyone was assigned the same pattern and what yours looked like next to the other people in the class?
Well, yeah. I mean, I started quilting, well, it's 30 years ago now. My daughter was 3 and she's 33 now. And it was just at the beginning of what they call modern quilting, the transition in the quilting culture from traditional designs and patterns of fabric to sort of more risk-taking. And when I took this quilting class, everybody was doing traditional, I thought, pretty boring colors and
Yeah.
fabrics. And I said, "Can I just pick out whatever I want?" Because we had the quilting class at the quilt store, so we purchased our fabric there. And I just picked out really colorful, unusual combinations, and everybody, was, "Whoa." And the teacher really liked it. She really encouraged me. I was lucky to have a teacher, my first teacher, be somebody who wasn't as out there as I was with color, but she really liked that I
Yeah.
was going in that direction, and she
Yeah.
really did support me, and I felt like I could do that. Even though I was working within the traditional framework of pattern, I was really taking a lot of risks with color and
Yeah.
combinations, and that was fun.
Mm. Gail, that in some ways to me feels like a metaphor for your entire career, that in some way that you've been able to work within the framework, but take it into different hues, different ways that haven't been done before. I mean, when I very intentionally in describing you spoke about you as a pioneer and you're in the field of developmental disabilities, because I think about how you've incorporated art and creativity within a realm where, I mean, it's such a serious space, and yet you bring into that space the lightness, the creativity, the artistry. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about how you have kind of drawn outside the lines within the developmental disability world.
Well, yeah, I think the work we did was pretty innovative in terms of taking people out of segregated, many institutional settings. Again, this was decades ago, and help people move into their own homes and provide individualized support to them based on their individual needs. So each person had an array of supports that was tailored to them so that they could hopefully live their best lives in the real community. So just by the nature of the design of the work, it was creative because we realized pretty early on that there's no one size fits all in terms of supporting people, that we really started with the person and who they were and what their gifts were and what their challenges were, and tried to, with, as much as they could direct our support, take our lead from the people themselves in terms of their strengths and what they wanted for their own lives. And it seems really logical and intuitively right, but it was very out of the box in terms of how services are typically designed even now for people with
Right.
disabilities. And, whether it's people with disabilities or other groups, that, there's much more of a cookie cutter approach to
Right.
supporting people. And a lot of the people that we worked with, a lot of them had a lot of trauma that they came into the program with. And not a lot of people, when we started out, were older and they didn't necessarily have families. They hadn't been in the public school system. And so it was hard in a lot of ways. It was really rewarding to see people get their freedom and have a real life and community. And really, the point of it was to be, as service providers, as invisible as possible so that people could just be real in real community. Because the work was challenging, We were always looking for opportunities to reflect, to go deeper, to really think about what we were doing. And one of the things I started doing was having staff write stories about their work and share them in staff meetings. And so we actually made it a requirement that once a month people had to bring a story into the staff meeting. And that just set off really powerful changes within the organization. It was really transformative because, as you know, through writing, you access parts of yourself and your experience that just talking about it doesn't go there, doesn't
Right.
go as deep. And so we would have these very powerful experiences as a group of staff, writing and sharing our stories. It eventually became a book. That was very powerful, one of the most creative things we did. And, we got a lot of pushback from the staff at some point because, it was stressful, it was revealing.
Yeah.
People always were too busy to take the time. But
Mm.
when it was a requirement, they didn't have a choice. And people were just incredibly creative.
Mm.
The people who you saw as the least creative in terms of their interactions would have these like amazing stories. And, we'd be in a meeting for an hour and a half and we'd go from laughing together to crying together as we shared our stories. And so that was one of the most powerful things I think I did in terms of my work,
Mm.
to change the tone, to just move us to a deeper level of reflection.
Gail, there's two things you've said, and they both track to a similar idea, and I'm going to try to work out how to say it, but it's something to do with the making the invisible visible. And you talked about that in
Mhm.
two different ways. You talked about it with people with developmental disabilities who may not have been able to communicate, at least verbally, a preference. You talked about almost how do we make ourselves almost invisible and in a really benevolent way, making sure that we're not almost, if I could extend this analogy, forcing our fabric preferences onto people, but as best we
Right.
are able. And people are able to communicate in so many different, like there's an attunement, especially when language isn't there, to be able to discern, well, what fabric are they suggesting? And I think that's part of your gift, is being able to speak this language that doesn't require words, because and I know this because of the relationships you've had with clients, sometimes over decades, that there's an attunement, there's like a gravitational pull, because it's not you saying, I know you'd like this fabric to, or I think I know what's best for you because I've been in this space forever. It's the really subtle alignment with accessing what is absolutely there, the preference, the choice, the agency. But and then you also extended that though to the workers within the agency, some of those who seem the most timid or the most nervous or whatever, who aren't wanting to really get into the telling the stories, but somehow you had a sense that, no, there is also something there, that if creativity is, if we have permission, let me put it that way, permission to access this invisible source of wisdom, information, we'll all be surprised if we can make the space to listen to that. I mean, that the genius, which I mean, you probably didn't think about it, you just intuitively knew the genius in that, Gail. I mean, the genius in that is just really stunning to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it felt very risky because I
Yeah.
got so much pushback from people. And even though, after we started it, of course, it was the highlight of everybody's
Mm,
month when
mm,
we got together and shared in that way. And I have to give a lot of credit to the team of people I worked with. who were extraordinarily creative.
Yeah.
And it is a matter of giving permission and
Yeah.
accessing and creating the space within the workplace to be creative and to value. I mean, to me, it's a way of reflection, right?
Yeah.
That isn't just talking, but putting words to paper, for example.
Yeah.
And I think reflection was the heart of what we did. And nobody ever has time for it. No matter what job you're in, it takes over and
Yeah.
you get busy and it's a kind of discipline, really,
Mm.
to say we're going to do this. It's important. It's going to take us to another place that's good and that we need.
Yeah.
And being the director, I had some authority to
Yeah.
expect it
Yeah.
from people, and it paid off. I mean, and that's the thing. You try things, not everything works, but that worked in
Yeah.
really beautiful ways.
There's a couple of things you said that I really appreciate and resonate. One of them is, like, for as much as I enjoy talking, sometimes the words just aren't there for a whole number of reasons. And I'm just at the very beginning of really understanding what that's about. And sometimes it's just the words don't even feel true enough for the feeling. So yeah, I can force them, but something's lost. So I love that you're bringing in a different language. That you said something that really struck me, which was about the risk of bringing in and sensing that, like, the value of creativity, because I think so often when there are these invisible and not well understood ways of whether it's communicating, sensing, being, there's this default that it's not trustworthy, it's not reliable, it's not provable because it's not knowable in the forms that we're used to. So to me, one of the most powerful and necessary forms of leadership are the ones that are willing to listen to that intuitive impulse. In this case, coming through you as the creative impulse. I think now more than ever, because we need all of the sources of information and ways of being that are available. I find that deeply inspiring that you would do that.
Well, I think also, the people that we supported taught us so much about knowing in different ways. Because when you
Yes.
work with people who have cognitive impairments
Yeah.
or think differently or see the world, don't express themselves in the same way that you and I might, you have to really be open to seeing in different ways and understanding people in different ways, because you can talk at some people forever and they're not really going to, words don't, as you said, don't always make sense.
Right.
And so trying to understand and know people in a different way and being with them when words aren't really at the center ways. It's an amazing challenge, but it does allow you to use your other senses
Right.
and to be with people in not necessarily a verbal way.
There's so many things I've thought about in your connection to working with people with disabilities, but I don't know that I ever thought about it as an opportunity for to continue to hone that creative muscle or impulse. Because if you don't see people as problems to solve, but as sources of mystery, of wisdom, of other ways, then it's always a creative encounter. It's always generative. I just keep thinking of you shared with me about one person in particular who other people would say, "Oh, be careful working with this person. They're physical, they could be violent." And that person just, like, glommed onto you immediately, almost energetically, because there was a knowingness, like, "Oh, she speaks my language." Mm.
Yeah. 'Cause it can be very powerful, and I think that's what made the work I did so satisfying and beautiful in so many ways. I felt very
Mm.
lucky to meet people on such a different level and have these long-term relationships. And like you said, that sensing people have this type of wisdom that we can't really name in
Yeah.
typical ways, but to know who's a safe person,
Yeah.
who's somebody who's going to support you as who you are and
Right.
not try to make you do things that are really aversive to you. It's amazing how you can sense that in people if you open yourself. And I think, a lot of people with disabilities who depend on caregivers for their lives really are, very highly developed in that sort of trust muscle because they have to be.
They have to be.
It's their own survival to
Right.
do that.
Hmm. Gail, it's interesting is we've talked many different times over the years. I've had this sense of your kind of having incubated beauty and creativity, almost waiting, not with any particular timeline, but having a sense of it when there was the time to express, you would and you did. But I'm starting to think of it a little bit differently, like that still being true, but also that the sense of you're doing that in relationship with other people because we're all incubating something more true. Call it whatever you
Hmm.
want. We're actually just incubating who we are somewhere that can be extremely hard to access or and remember. I mean, it's there. I believe that who we actually are is always there. It's very, very easy to forget and hard to remember. But my sense in hearing you talk about your relationships with people, in particular with disabilities, but I'd say people in general, I wouldn't limit that in any way, just the nature of who you are is that that quiet, unspoken permission of who you are exactly as you are is welcome and inviting something more true in every single encounter.
Thank you.
That's my
Yeah.
sense of you. Gail, I perhaps as a way of closing, I mean, we've talked and you've been someone who's been such a supporter of me in my life and always in so many ways, including as the podcast gets off the ground, that it's so meaningful to me. It's easy to talk with people where it's just like an echo chamber and they tell you like everything's perfect, you're amazing, keep going. I actually struggle with that kind of feedback because I do not know what to do with it. And you have this amazing way of being so loving and thoughtful and also honest and talking with me even about beauty, even after all the ways you shared that it enlivens you and how much it means, it still could be something that you reckon with. And do I even identify with beauty in myself? And I'm curious today how it is that you would say that you orient to beauty, what it is to you, what it means to you or feels like to you in this moment.
Well, I don't think about it as a thing. And so I don't know. That's a good question. I don't see it in myself. I see
Mm,
it outside of myself in a way. So it feels like it exists without me, that maybe I'm a vehicle for it, but I don't see it as me sort of making beauty or creating. I mean, I feel like it's there already and that I have to be present to see it. And a lot of times I don't.
yeah,
I'm just too caught up in struggling with whatever internal thing is going on. And I don't
yeah,
necessarily say, oh, there's this part of me that is beautiful and I need to access it. I
yeah,
don't think about things that way. And so being in beauty, I guess, would be being in my space or in nature. It's like I know it when I see it,
yeah.
I feel it. But It's just more on a sensing level. And, I spend a lot of time in my house. And so I can spend a lot of time looking at a corner of my room or something
Mm.
and just getting absorbed in it. But I'm not thinking, oh, I'm looking at beauty right now, or this
Yeah.
is beautiful. But the absence of it, I notice,
Mm.
like you said, spaces that just aren't comfortable, or I think there's like a symmetry or a energy that's there when there is beauty in a space. And it's more like I notice when it's not there,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
No, it does. I I really love that. I love when you said, and it's just beauty just is. It's just there. That's I feel it that way too, that it can take forms that are tangible and that we enjoy looking at, but actually the quality of it is really more of an energy or a frequency, and you can feel it almost when you come into resonance, sometimes just for a moment. We don't actually have to do anything to experience it. It goes back to what you said earlier too about being with people when there's an openness to experiencing it. Maybe it is available all the time. I'd have to that would be something a challenge for me to sit, for example, in an empty space. It visually seems empty, and to be able to locate whether it's beauty, whether it's locating myself. I'm having a hard time actually figuring out anymore what the difference is, the inside and outside, like, to find it.
Hmm.
That feels like an invitation maybe for all of us. How do we come into contact with beauty? How do we come into contact with that kind of creative impulse, especially when it we can sense, whether it's visually or in some other way, a sense of absence? How can we still find it?
Well,
Yeah.
what came to mind is when I spend time with your daughter, Dessa,
Mm.
and how she would, she's 8 now, but when she was even younger, like 5 or 6, she'd go through my house and do these assemblages. Or we'd go for a walk and she'd put stuff in her pockets and take them out, and she would put them together in this amazing way, like
Mm.
on my coffee table. And
Yeah.
I think about how it wasn't like she was trying, it just came out of her. And she just picked up things that seemed pretty random, but they came together in an amazing way. And I think that is something about the effortlessness of beauty, that almost something that's spontaneous. And when you put too much effort into it, it
Mm.
can go south. It doesn't feel right. A child who just is uninhibited about collecting things and seeing the sort of intrinsic value of them. That just came to me. Children just seem like they naturally, I guess not every person can externalize it in that way, but I've always admired that about Dessa and how she can create beauty around her.
Mm. I love that. In a sense, to me, it feels like a provocation because I can tell when I'm trying too hard. And I
Mhm.
think about it even with the podcast. Some episodes feels like so much efforting to what's the exact way that I want to share this message, or with my writing, I could write the same paragraph like 18 times. And I was just talking yesterday with my husband who listened to one of the episodes. I said, "Oh, I can barely listen to that episode. I don't like how it came out." And he's like, "I don't know what you're talking about. It's my favorite episode." And I said, "I can't believe that
Interesting.
because I spent the least amount of time with it." In a way, I guess I was trying to see if it was possible to communicate something meaningful without all the efforting, and I struggled to believe that it would be valuable, and he's like, "Well, that's my absolute favorite episode," and I think I think there is this provocation of, can we trust the beauty that's incubating in all of us to find an expression that doesn't take so much time, that doesn't take all of this. Yeah, and I keep going back to the word efforting to be, because it already exists. I think that is, in my exhaustion that I feel a lot, it's such a beautiful invitation to say, "You don't have to be trying this hard, it's already there. Can you trust? Can you trust that beauty which already exists?" So I'm really taking that in, and I would invite others to be able to access something that is so delighted to show it to us in its naturalness, to take what feels like a risk, but actually it's not a risk, if we trust it to reveal itself. I love that. So I appreciate you bringing Dessa back into the conversations as an invitation for all of us. Yeah. Mm. Gail, I love this conversation. I love that after 10 years, I still get to know you more, and I know that will be true every single day that I get to know you, but it feels like a real gift for others to be able to continue to learn from you and be inspired by you. So thank you so much for being here today with me and with all of us.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Well, I hope everybody has a chance to take this in time, and also to connect with our full mini series on creativity. And until next time, may you walk in beauty. Thank you for listening to the Liberating Beauty Podcast. To learn more about the podcast, my work, and how I can support you on your journey of spiritual becoming, head over to the Together in Beauty website or email me at rebecca@togetherinbeauty.com. It's an honor to accompany you on the journey. A huge thank you to our multi-talented producer and co-creative director, Mapumba Cilombo. To learn more about Mapumba's work as a producer, sound engineer, and musician, check out the show notes for a link to his website at mapumbamusic.com. And as always, many thanks to you, our listeners. None of this would be possible without the energy, encouragement, and vitality that you reflect back to us each week. Until next time, may you walk in beauty.